and welcome to another Ableton Live sound design tutorial. We have a special tutorial today because it's Wavetable. And Wavetable, dare I say, is the most interesting synth that Ableton has. And Wavetable, which utilizes Wavetable Synthesis, is the most advanced form of synthesis, in my opinion, and we will be able to see why. So we've been looking at, in our sound design series, Ableton's operator device, which is an FM synthesizer, capable also of subtractive synthesis. And then in last video, we looked at Ableton's analog device, which just does subtractive synthesis. And it does it in a very analog-y way, hence the name analog. But now we're looking at Ableton's Wavetable device, which is a Wavetable synthesizer. We're going to be talking about how the sound flows through the device. I'm going to make some sounds and explain what I'm doing. But the most important thing to note is, because we're focusing on sound design, which is how you can design your sounds from scratch and to know exactly why they sound the way they do, we're going to see in this tutorial that regardless of what synthesis method is used, or even what synthesizer you choose to use, the same sort of areas of importance stay the same. For instance, you start with the waveform, you then will move to a filter section, then you'll move to an amplitude, which is volume section, and then envelopes will control those. Also, there will be LFOs. LFOs will also have envelopes. So when you start to see that these areas are all the same throughout all of these different synthesizers, that there's always going to be envelopes, waveforms, you can, once you understand that, you feel confident that you can basically learn any synthesizer you wish and any synthesizer method. But the main synthesizer methods are subtractive, FM, which is frequency modulation, and wavetable synthesis. So we're going to jump on into Ableton and get going. So Command-Shift-T to open up a MIDI track. You can also right-click and add MIDI track, and we are going to record enable. And we're going to make sure we're in the instrument section, and we are going to come down and we are going to double-click on Wavetable. Now, we're going to start here with our Wavetable device, and we can check this little triangle to give us access envelopes and then to the LFOs. Now, if we tick this triangle, it'll go away, but we'll still have access to them over here. So I'm almost hesitant to open this up because I don't want people to be like, oh my God, this is too confusing. This can get overwhelming, but if we go to our playbook, my sound design synthesis playbook, we'll realize it's not that scary. So right now, where do we start? As always, we start with the waveform. So right over here, we've got our waveform right here, which is a sine wave. And as you can see, if we use this wavetable, it'll change from a saw wave to which is a saw wave, kind of a morph between a saw wave and a square wave, and then of course, a square wave. I want to make sure I'm not clipping here. Let's give it a little bit of harmonics here. Let's go through. This is the wavetable. Let's give it. Remember, I said I like my square wave, so let's give it this square wave, and let's lower the octave a little bit. We're going to come down here, click the semitone down an octave. Do it again. Okay. Let's lower this volume here. Master volume. Let's lower it. So right now we just have a square wave. So as it stands, nothing's really different than any of the other synthesis we used. Okay, and I'll show it how we can, really take advantage of wavetables possibilities, but I want to give this very easy example first so you can see that this isn't as freaky as you might think it is. So we've got a square wave right here. Now, where does it go next? Well, it'll go to a filter. Just take a look at this filter right here. So right now, the filter is all the way open on a low-pass filter, as always. Now let's move it down. Let's give it some resonance. I like how it sounds right there. So right there, you're thinking, well, hey, this is just like subtractive. What's really different? Well, not too much else. Obviously, it will be later when we get into morphing the wavetable. But to keep with our simple example here, we've got these different envelopes, and we've got these LFOs. And of course, our amplitude envelope. And I'm just going to open this back up here. So right now, we want to say, what's happening with our volume? So we go to our amplifier envelope. So right now, our volume envelope basically says, what does our volume do? Well, it's saying we start at full volume, and over 20 milliseconds, it goes down to no volume, which is why we hardly hear anything. Let's bring out the decay. Okay. So what else might we do? You might say, well, we need to manipulate the filter because we have all these wonderful, delicious possibilities. So do we even have a filter envelope? No, not yet. That's why we use one of these other envelopes to control the filter. So let's take envelope 2. Let's have this do our filter. So right now, let's move it around. Nothing's changing. You might say, oh, because we have to assign an envelope amount like we saw in our other videos. So how you do this in Wavetable is a little bit different. Similar, but different. So right now, let's go over to our matrix. And you can see envelope 2. And you can see these different areas. See how we see filter frequency right here? And we have envelope 2. That's how we assign the amount. So let's see what happens now. Okay. And now let's play with our envelope. There you go. That's really it. Now, you might say, well, hey, man, so what, am I just using Wavetable to do the same thing we did in subtractive? No, because that's where the Wavetable part comes in. So look at this. So we're at this square wave right now. Let's move it down. With Wavetable, you get a morph through the Wavetable, giving you extra modulation capabilities. So let's put it right here. And let's enact an LFO. So the LFO up here, let's assign LFO1 to something. I'm going to turn it off retrigger mode. And right now it's at a rate of 1 hertz. So it's going to move this oscillator amount to give us this sort of an effect. So each time we hit a key, rather than it being the same, it'll move. Because as we can see, the way we make synthesizers sound really good is they have to have subtle movement over the time. Because when you're playing like a guitar or something, each time you're plucking a note, because you're plucking it with different velocity, with your plucking hand, and you're holding it down with different amount, you get these. It makes it sound more organic. So how would we do this? Well, what do we want to influence? With the envelope, we wanted that envelope to apply to the filter frequency. So with this LFO, we want it to apply to what? The oscillator 1 position. So let's come into oscillator 1 position. And as I turn it up, you'll start to see it moving. Now, that's a little bit strong, or it's moving a little bit too much. So let's move the LFO down a little bit, the LFO amount. And let's lower this rate. So there you go. That is our first sound that we are going to be, that's kind of the first introduction to Wavetable. Now, there's other things you can do. So you might say, well, I'm getting a little bored. How can we make this more interesting? Well, for one thing, we've got thousands of wavetables. So let's just keep everything the same and let's just put a different one on. Let's do beating 5. You might say, okay, well, I don't like the sound of that. Well, what do? Well, you can change the wavetable position, see if it sounds better. You might say, hey, I lost some subby character. It's too high nasally. Well, what you can do is come over here, enact the sub octave, and listen to the difference. Hear that without the sub? Because sometimes when you go to certain different wavetables, you might realize that you're losing some bottom end. So I won't say anything. So let's play around with this tone. What else can we do? Well, because we're using a filter, we can enact the filter, give it some drive. Wonderful. I'm sure you're getting excited. So let's do another sound. Let's go and do more of a longer sound. I'm going to push that button, null it out. So now we've got a default operator. So when we were on basics, we've got all these different wavetables we can use, but I'm not going to use basics. I'm going to use something different. I've been looking at these vintage ones. Here, we're going to take the octave down. So you might say that's way too bright. Let's take down the frequency. I'm going to put some sub on there. Might have to go down an extra octave. In fact, I'm actually going to go down another octave. No, that's too much. Hear that? That's what it does really well at doing. So I'm doing this with my hand right now. And I'm going to go back, make sure I'm not clipping. Okay. So what do we do with this? Well, we want to put some sort of movement on the frequency. So we're going to use an LFO. An LFO, just like we've always been doing. So I'm going to take this rate down really low. I'm going to turn off retrigger mode. The reason why is that if retrigger is on, each time you hit a new key, it's going to start at the same spot, but I want each time to sort of free run. So we're going to take this frequency down here, and we're going to assign some LFO1. I'm going to lower the resonance. Actually, I do want it to start at the same point, so I am going to put the retrigger on. And because I want it to fade in over time, I'm actually going to adjust the attack right here. So it kind of the LFO fades in a little bit. I'm going to go to the amplifier section right up here, and I'm going to give it that fade in. So ready before. By the way, that's a C minor chord. I'm going to fade in the amplifier. It's a little bit too much. Also, we're going to give it some release. Too much attack. I'm going to give it some filter drive because why not? See how over here it starts at the same point because we've got that retrigger on. What else are we going to do? We don't really need a filter envelope on it because we are already having that filter being influenced by the LFO, which is being faded in, which is kind of giving us our own filter envelope. So I don't really need a filter necessarily for the filter, although I can certainly do that as well because we have just unlimited possibilities. But let's do something different. Let's come over here and let's experiment with the unison mode. So I'm going to do classic. Notice how that changed. And by the way, our amp envelope is too long. I'm going to decrease it down. Now let's turn off the unison mode. See, it's just more mono, it's more one-dimensional, playing the same notes, but we go into classic mode. And this lets you know just how beefy and amazing Wavetable can get. See this amount? If we turn it up all the way, it doesn't sound good. But what would happen if we could just modulate it? Let's go into LFO2. I'm going to put it on retrigger, turn it off retrigger, and unison. Let's add some unison. So without it, I've got way too much release here. So this amount is changing a little bit by the LFO. Now, where Wavetable really shines is by moving this wavetable over time. So I'm going to do it manually right here. So I want LFO1 to do that. Or actually, I'm going to go with LFO2 for now, just because I think it'll give a more extreme effect. So oscillator 1 position, let's assign some LFO1. See how it's moving? It's moving a little bit too much for my liking, so I'm going to try LFO1 because it's a slower rate. And I'm going to go in a negative amount, so it's kind of moving against the way the filter is. And so with sound design synthesis, it's all about modulation. So for instance, if you were to just hit a square wave, it sounds awful because it's just held. It's just sustained. There's no movement. But when we add movement through envelopes, through LFOs, when the harmonic content is being morphed and waved through, like wavetable synthesis, you get those movements. And so what's unique about Wavetable is you can modulate so many parameters and you can get sounds that you just aren't going to get in analog or FM synthesis. But you can still get those same FM and analog or subtractive synthesis sounds with Wavetable, which is why it's such a powerful synthesis type. Wavetable synthesis has been around for a while too on very interesting synthesizers that existed in like the 80s and 90s. I think the Waldorf Wave something might have been one. I'm not really sure. I could be completely wrong. But Wavetable really got popular when they started with you've heard of Native Instruments, Massive, with like the with the dubstep stuff. Everyone was using Massive. You know, Massive was a Wavetable synthesizer, and now Serum, and then Massive sort of got it like succeeded by Serum. Everyone was using Serum now. And so what's interesting is you just get opportunities and possibilities for modulation and routing, things that you wouldn't necessarily be able to get in FM or subtractive synthesis, which is why a lot of people mostly just use Wavetable now. Because when you hear subtractive synthesis sounds, when you hear FM synthesis sounds, people who design a lot of sounds are like, oh yeah, that's FM. Oh yeah, that's that classic subtractive sound. But when you hear these Wavetable type sounds, it's not immediately as recognizable. You might know that someone was using Wavetable synthesis, but you can't just like go in and have exact access to that Wavetable synthesizer. So we're going to move on to Sampler next. Sampler is going to allow us to create very unique synthesizer sounds, basically using Wavetable synthesis, but still very interesting. And then after we do that Sampler sound design tutorial, then I'm really going to explain all the real interesting, deep possibilities that you have and create really interesting sounds. So if you want to go so much deeper into all of these, subtractive, FM, Wavetable, using Ableton's analog operator, Wavetable, Sampler, then we're really going to get deep, and I'm going to do a lot of... Anyways, I won't let the video get any longer. If you found this to be of benefit, please like, comment, and subscribe. I'm finally starting to get people that are watching, that are actually getting able to see these things. So if that continues, I'm just going to keep making more and more. Thank you so much, and have a great day.